Welcome to
Tzili.
another tzuzamen. Hi, Tzip. Ido Aharoni, the
Wow.
mythological ex-consul of Israel in New York. Hi, Ido.
Who is going back and forth from
Hi,
Tel Aviv
nice
to
to meet
Ayun.
you again. It's a pleasure to be on your show again.
Right.
First of all,
What are you doing now?
few words on Carter. We cannot pass by, without
Carter
saying
just died today,
a
100 years old.
good word on
Yeah,
wonderful Jimmy Carter.
I never met him. You knew him.
I met him a few times. One of a kind. They don't make them anymore like this. Very, very special, very brave, very strong, very truthful, very straightforward,
Loyal to his wife.
loyal to humankind. Very, very loyal to humankind,
Yeah,
really.
So
yeah.
how
I
about
think
you?
I'm okay. I think he will be remembered for introducing compassion to foreign policy.
Yeah.
He worked with the Israelis and the Egyptians, less so with the Iranians.
Yeah.
Well, he paid the price for the Iranians. Very, but I have to say, in our days, with the hostages in Gaza, what a big difference. He gave up his second term just to make sure that they'll all come home safe. Exactly the opposite from what's going on today. And this is something that it's very,
Yeah.
very hard to
Should be
swallow
He
acknowledged.
was,
because you
yeah,
know that it can be different.
he was a
it.
true Christian.
Yeah.
He was a true Christian and a believer, and it showed in everything that he did.
But just think about it. Judaism also had some values that have to do with
Yeah,
humanity.
of
Don't
course.
do anything that you don't like to the other.
But
Yes,
that's one of the reasons for the success of Camp David was the three leaders that believed in the same values.
Right,
They were deep believers in God and in
right.
humankind, and it helped them. And
yeah.
all the other people that helped a lot. But it was something very much in common for the three of them that they could understand. So,
Yeah. So what's new
yeah.
with you?
Nothing much, I still do my thing. I teach, I speak, I have my own business. Everything's okay. I've never been busier since 10/7. The demand is very, very high for public speaking. Not just me, I think it's all over. And so I find myself almost every weekend in a different city.
You have a new program now or a new series of lectures. Tell us a little bit about it.
So the Stryker Center, which is operating under Temple Emmanuel and under the leadership of Rabbi Davidson and my dear friend Dr. Gadi Levy, really soared to new heights. In the years that they've been operating, they really became the premier stage for public affairs in New York City, and they've done events with the biggest names that you can think of. I think, with the exception of Carter, every living past president was there speaking,
Yeah.
including Barack and Michelle Obama separately, Bill and Hillary Clinton separately, George W. Bush, and so on. And so I've done some programs with them in the past, but since 10/7, they decided to do a special program with me that will have 5 sessions from January to May, monthly sessions. Each session will be about 2 hours. It will be in person at the Stryker Center in Manhattan. And the idea is to every month cover a different aspect of Israel post 10/7. So one month we'll talk about the military, another month we'll talk about the economy, tourism, and so on and so forth. And it will be mostly for people to ask questions because a lot of people are confused.
What is the main difference that you see since October 7th towards Israel?
So there's several things that are counterintuitive. Um, the first, Israel in the United States. So a lot of people are concerned with the rise of anti-Semitism, and rightly so. It is a big concern. But people forget that the level of political support for Israel is very high, because the Americans experience 10/7 in a very similar way to the way they experienced 9/11. They see this as a clash between two
Yes.
civilizations. This is not to say that there's no criticism of Israel. There's a great deal of criticism, even among Jews, but by and large, Americans are very supportive of Israel. In Israel itself, contrary to what you're seeing in Western countries, that since World War II, with the introduction of wealth and plenitude, became softer. When you ask Americans, are you willing to fight for your country? When you ask young Americans, only 25% say yes.
Say yes.
And what you see in Israel is something exactly that goes in the other direction. More and more young Israelis, because of 10/7, because of the way it was done, because of, because Israelis understand that it's not really part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hamas was not interested in advancing Palestinian independence. Hamas wants to kill Jews, and they still want to kill Jews, even though they're weak now. And so imagine in my son's unit, the response ratio was 150% on October 8th. So people came back from all over the world from vacations. They dropped everything and they went to the army, reservists. And that's something unique, which I don't think you will see in other Western societies. The other big change is that all of a sudden Israelis feel legally isolated. The threat from the International Court of Justice doesn't only apply to the leadership, it also applies to every person who served in the army during the war. And so Israelis are really concerned about that. The Israeli media is covering this very, very extensively. So, and then of course, add to that the fact that the war was very expensive. It created a huge budgetary deficit, that it's a generational deficit, meaning it will take a generation or two to overcome the deficit.
Right.
Tourism is in shambles also. We were at 5.5 million tourists before 10/7. How long will it take for us to go back to that? Who knows? Probably 5 years, if not more. So Israelis are very concerned, and you see a nation in anxiety. Of course, the fact that the hostages were not brought back yet adds to the anxiety of Israelis, and erodes the trust Israelis have in institutions, in particular in the government. Because if you think about it, when parents send their children to the army, they want to know that the government will do its utmost to bring them back, God forbid, if they fall in captivity. And when they see that it's not happening, it's worrisome. It's worrisome to every parent in Israel, including myself.
Not just the parents, though. It's everybody who don't have kids in the army. I mean, they suddenly, the solidarity that we used to have, which disappeared in many ways on many levels of society, but in this respect, the solidarity is there. Really
Right.
caring about the soldiers, about the hostages, about the wounded, and their families. I think here we can find a real solidarity between the Israelis.
Correct.
I'm not
Correct.
illusion, you
Yeah,
know.
I agree with you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Ido, what is your take on the closing of the embassy in Ireland, in Dublin?
and
I
why?
think it's a mistake. I think it's anti-diplomacy. Diplomacy is all about having a seat around the table. I was also against Israel. I mean, the United States. Israel urging the United States to get out of the Iran agreement. I think it was a mistake, because that's the whole idea of diplomacy, is to be in a position to impart your message, to be in a position to be heard. And also, true diplomacy is to look at the Irish people, conduct research, see, okay, so the government is anti Israel. In Canada, for example, the government is very critical of Israel. But the Canadian people is very much on our side in this fight against radical Islamism. And so you can't punish the Irish people. I think it's a big mistake. It's a lack of understanding of the meaning of diplomacy.
But it seems like that the way Israel is ran now, diplomacy is off the chart, you know. It's not about diplomacy, it's about to do in spite of and whatever we want, and nobody will tell us what to
And
do.
to show power.
Yeah, so diplomacy was always unpopular since its very inception. Diplomats were blamed for the inability to prevent war. For example, World War One, diplomacy was blamed for its failure to prevent the war, which was preventable, as we know from history. So diplomacy was always associated with secrecy, with privilege, with upper class. It's very easy to mobilize the masses against diplomats. The image, think about what is the image that we have of a diplomat
Having a good time where they are.
having a good
Having
time
a
in a
good
cocktail
time,
party.
they're invited to everywhere. They have, yeah.
Exactly.
Do you think that the
Especially,
atmosphere of the leadership today in the world, this type of leadership that is taking over, the room of diplomacy is the same?
so what you're absolutely correct. What we're seeing is the rise of populism, and in some cases, anti-state populism, which is the populists target the institutions of the state, like the police, the army. We see even here in Israel, they target the army, they target the Secret Service, they target the legal system, the court system.
Right.
And so they target the civil service as part of the populist agenda. Now, what is populism? Populism is basically to say it's us versus the elite. The people, we are the people, and we are fighting the elite. And the elite is doing a disservice to us, the people. That's populism. And so you see it very easy to mobilize people today in social
Right.
media to turn against the court system, to turn against the army, to turn against the Secret Service, and so on. It's not all the people, but it's some of the people. And sometimes a group of people can really make a lot of noise. And we see that throughout the Western world. We see that happening all over the place. And again, it's not a good sign. It's not a sign of a healthy society.
Right, of course. But tell me something. Since you were an ambassador to New York,
Consul.
you consul, you had probably had to confront a lot of misconceptions, disinformation, and nowadays it's becoming unbelievable. I came to a point when I don't know anymore to believe. When I read something, I'm not sure I'm reading the truth. And the engineering of our minds, but by so many forces. What would you do if you were an ambassador today, trying to find those mind engineering and
It's a
misinformation?
very good question. Yeah, it's a very good question. So what I would do, I would first of all find my partners, identify my partners. You're absolutely correct. We see this especially in academia, but also in other circles. In the world of art, we see that the um, people are siding with the underdog, not only because they think that the underdog deserves their compassion, but also because they are led to believe that the underdog is always right. That's the problem. What you're seeing is people that say, because you are weak, you're not accountable for your actions. It's the Hamas, but it's also the criminals that go into a store and load stuff into their
Right.
in their cars, and they're not doing anything to them. It's the people that riot in the streets of America, and there is no penalty. They're not even being brought to justice. I had an incident with my car. There was a serious case of a car theft in New York. In my case, the police did not even investigate, although there's a video of the thieves and everything. They did not even investigate,
Wow.
which
And you
means
know
that
that most of the stores now, all the pharmacy, big no pharmacy like CVS, and they close most of the
right,
products
they
because
lock up everything
lock
because
up
again
everything because
because
it's
they
stealing.
know exactly they and the reason why they lock up everything is because they know that the system, even if they will capture the thieves, nothing
Nothing.
will happen, and they know
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons people voted for Trump, is because they felt that their own personal safety, that there's no There's no rule of law. There's no order. There's chaos.
What can the citizen do against the misinformation? Or you, when you were ambassador, how could you even
So I
send the
started saying,
messages that it will be acceptable?
right. So you have to choose your fights, pick your fights. So let's say there are about 10% of the Americans that whatever we're trying to sell them, they're not buying. They did not like Oslo. They certainly don't like the war in Gaza. They don't like Israel. By the way, among those 10%, the majority of them, the majority of the 10%, think that Israel has a right to exist. So those who don't believe that Israel has a right to exist, a very small minority. But let's say the 10% is a waste of time. There's nothing we can do or say to change their mind, right? You take people like Judith Butler, you take people like Noam Chomsky, waste of time. Then you have 20%. 20% of the American people that report a very strong connection to Israel. They're mostly religious people, Christians and Jews, but their connection to Israel is very real. When something happens in Israel, it's as if it happened to them. They're not interested in Israeli politics so much, so it's not so much about policy for them, it's about the emotional connection to the Holy Land. So with them, they're already on our side. Then you have the 70% left. That's where you have to work. Work with the 70%, give them the immune system, which is what you guys do in your own lives. You're making films, you're creating art. That's exactly the language that we need to use. Give the 70% a reason to get to know us. So when people say Israel is performing genocide in Gaza, that they will be in a position to counter that, right? I give always the example of the rock band from England, Radiohead, that their first big success was in Israel thanks to the work of Yoav Kutner from Galei Tzahal. And when Roger Waters, many years ago, urged them to boycott Israel, their response to Roger Waters is exactly what I'm talking about. They said to him, "You don't get to tell us what Israel is all about. We know Israel. You don't tell us that Israel is apartheid. We know Israel. In fact, one of them is actually married to an Israeli. And so they know Israel intimately. That's what we need to do. How do you know places intimately without going there? How do I know Brazil without ever being to Brazil? Through popular culture, through arts, through movies, through television, through music, through literature, lifestyle. I love Japanese food, but I've been to Japan only twice in my life. But I eat Japanese food all the time. I'm connected to Japan through the food, through their cuisine.
Yeah.
And I'm connected to Japan through their movies. And people watch shows from Korea and they develop a connection to Korea and so on and so forth. That's what kept America as a world leader all those years.
Yeah, but
Hollywood.
but in the last, I don't know how many years now, the film festivals around the world are picking mostly pro-Palestinian films.
I know. And same thing happening in the world of literature and so on. So as I said, there is a circle. So what can we do? On the individual level, I always urge people not to cave into the algorithm. The algorithm is pushing us to see the world in a binary fashion, meaning black versus white, plus versus minus, good versus evil. And that's where cancel culture is coming from. I can't handle complexity, so I want to cancel the other side. I can't hear them, I want them to disappear. So, on a personal level, I urge people to limit themselves to a small number of resources that they trust, and to avoid overload of too much news, overload of too many WhatsApp groups, overload of too many videos. It messes our minds. That's the first thing that I would urge people to do.
Right.
Secondly, that's on an individual level. On a collective level, we have to do what the Jewish community did in America back in the day when they were not allowed to go into the entertainment industry 100 years ago. They created Hollywood. When they were not allowed to go into hospitals to work in hospitals, they created their own hospitals. And this is what's going to happen. Those festivals that are pushing us out will create a competition. I'll tell you a story, okay? In Los Angeles, 100 years ago, Jews were not allowed to join the lucrative country clubs.
Right.
There were the Bel Air Country Club, the LA Country Club.
Also in Florida. Yeah.
So the Jews created almost
own.
100 years ago their own country club.
Right. Yeah.
And guess what? It's the number one country club in all of LA today.
Right.
Right. So that's what's going to happen. We will find our own platforms that that accept us, that respect us, that accept art. By the way, these people have contempt to art because it's not the fault of an artist that he or she come from Israel. They need to judge them by their art and not by their identity.
Right. But tell me something. Since you really know a lot, and also you are at NYU, how do you think that all those demonstrations, but your students, my students, NYU students, Columbia students, etc., do you think it's really Israel, or do you think there is something behind it? Because most of them don't even know what they're talking about.
Israel is only the excuse.
Right.
These kids that are products of overprotective parenting, as Jonathan Haidt is teaching us in his classic book, The Coddling of the American Mind. It's about America. They're being taught from cradle that America is the source of all evil. And so it's anti-American in the first place. If you noticed, the demonstrators, they were burning Israeli flag, but also American flag. Where on the Jewish side, they were raising the Israeli flag and the American flag. That's the whole story. So I think that it backfired on them. I really believe that Claudine Gay's testimony in Congress was a big reason for the stunning victory of Donald Trump, because of the hypocrisy, not because so much about Israel. I'll explain. And Claudine Gay was asked if harassment of Jewish students is a violation of the codes of the university. She said it depends on the context.
Right.
But if it was, and we all know that if Black students were harassed, she had no hesitation to call the police immediately.
Right.
Right? And take care of it and arrest the people that harass them. So what people viewed as unacceptable is the hypocrisy. What is racism? Racism and anti-Semitism is the discriminatory singling out of a group because of its identity. You can say everybody can join this country club but Jews. That's anti-Semitism. So that's exactly what she demonstrated. She demonstrated an anti-Semitic view of her job. I'm ready to protect every group, but in the name of inclusion, I'm excluding the Jews. That's unacceptable. And I remember that when I saw her testimony, I didn't see it live on TV. I saw the video a few days later. I remember texting my friend Amir Gissin, who's now the head of Maccabi, and I told him she's handing the victory over to the Republicans. I wrote it to him, and he reminded me after Trump's victory. He said, "Do you remember you wrote this to me?" And I really believe that. I really believe that that testimony, that hearing, that congressional hearing, shocked people because of the hypocrisy, not because it was about Israel.
So what would you do if in your class, like it was in my class, people came with kafia, the Arab thing, and I heard some of them saying, whispering genocide. Although, they know I'm Israeli, of course.
Yeah.
How,
so,
how
I teach at Tel Aviv U. I teach at Touro University, which we don't have that problem, although 70% at Touro are not Jewish. The students, we have about 20,000 students in New York, actually next to you at Times Square. It's Tzili. And then I will begin this semester to teach in San Diego, UCSD and SDSU. In fact, in a few days, I'm heading to California. And so I've given lectures in in front of students with kafia. So usually I don't. And at NYU I had students lifting signs. I think Tzili was there when they tried to block the cameras at the conference that we had, only because I'm in Israel. So usually what I do, I don't, unless the subject matter is brought up, I don't deal with them. I just tell them, listen, we're here to study. In my case, we're studying nation branding, marketing. You want to stay here, you have to, you know, but if you came to make a political statement, this is not the place. And usually it works. And if it doesn't work, then I can, I can call the authorities. I can call the university police. But I've never had that problem. I've never had that problem. And the truth of the matter is, again, they're not doing any service to their cause.
Right.
They're alienating the American people. The encampments that we saw in campuses throughout the United States angered Americans, and I think that it got them in trouble not only academically, because remember what Bill Ackman did. Bill Ackman did something brilliant. If you remember, the morning of October 7th, 32 student organizations at Harvard issued a petition that said that Israel is at fault. It was Israel's blame, Israel's fault that 10/7 happened,
Right.
according to them. Right? This is before Israeli military response. So Bill Ackman did something brilliant. He said, I would like to know the names of all the students that signed those petitions. And he was in a position to demand that because he was a giver, a donor to the university.
Right.
So the university said, why would you like to have the names? And he said, because I want to make sure that I will never hire them. What
Wow.
was the response of the students?
Stop.
Tens of students retracted.
Yeah.
One law student said, I did not read the petition before I signed it. Yes, a law student. Other people said, we did not even know that we were members of these organizations, and so on and so forth.
Wow.
So they're not resilient. I don't believe that this is the generation that will produce the next leaders of America. These kids are not going to be the leaders. That
Right.
girl that stood in front of the cameras at Columbia and demanded, in the name of human rights, pizza delivery.
Right.
I don't know if you remember that. She's
Yeah.
not going to lead anything in life, this
Right.
girl. And she happens to be Jewish, by the way.
I
She's not going to be a leader of any kind. These are spoiled children, products of overprotective parenting, never had to deal with any challenge. The leaders will come from other universities,
Right.
Right.
from state universities, from community college. That's where they'll come from.
Right.
Because these are the kids that had to deal with challenges and had to develop the resilience.
Ido, one word for your field towards the next 4 years.
My one word about what?
Your feel about the next 4 years.
You mean in terms of the Trump presidency?
Yeah.
So, I think it's going to be a mixed bag. I don't think he will be able to do all the things that he wants to do simply because it's difficult, and you need to have a real well-oiled machine in place to make all those things happen. But I do think that in his basic motivation, there are some very good things that potentially can be very good news for the Middle East. I think that he will,
Right.
when Trump looks at the world, right, and he has three pressing issues right now, right? He has Russia, Ukraine, he has China, Taiwan, and he has Israel, Hamas, and Israel, Hezbollah. When he looks at all those three bundles, I think he reckons that it's easier for him to solve the Israel issue first because that's where he has more leverage on Israel. Not so much on the Palestinians, but he has more leverage on Israel. So I think he will strive to present a deal that will include the following elements: the end of the war and the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza, obviously the extension of the ceasefire in Lebanon, the release of the hostages, an agreement regarding the rebuilding of Gaza, the normalization with Saudi Arabia, which will be the big achievement for him, probably will give him the Nobel Prize if he's able to achieve that. And then lastly, it will have to find a way to deal with the Iranians. Either have the Iranians sign a new deal now that they're in a very weak position. It's possible to have them sign a deal and agree to a much stricter supervision of the international institutions, or alternatively, together with Israel, plan a military airstrike to destroy the Iranians' nuclear facilities, which is something that is doable if the Americans want to do it. So these are the 5 elements that I think he will try to achieve immediately. The thing is that I don't think that the current coalition in Israel will be in a position to accept a political horizon for the Palestinians. So, in many ways, Trump probably represents the biggest threat to the survival of the coalition in Israel, in my view.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of his desire
Right.
to present a deal, a mega deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what are the, you gave us a lot of things to think about and a lot of ways, path to go through. I would like to thank you.
That's why we bring Ido.
Thank
I
you.
know.
Ido, thank
Have
you.
have a good trip.
Thank you so much. And I hope to see you soon. And of course, you're all invited to the Stryker Center.
Right.
I promise it's going to be very interesting.
Okay, we'll come.
See you
Thank you
next
so much.
week.